This is our 44th lesson in the study of the biblical flood. This is Marion Fox teaching the class, and we're teaching it out of my second edition of my book, The Biblical Flood. And so there's new material in it over what was in the first edition of the book. Haven't changed the thrust, I've just added more information. And tonight we're going to be looking at chapter 12. And this is chapter 12 in the second edition, because that would be, I think, chapter 13 in the chapter, 11 in the first edition, if you happen to just have the first edition. We're going to introduce some information here on a full-grown creation. We're going to be looking at the speed of light, and we will not have time to get into Hubble's law and the age of the universe. We'll get into that the next week. Next lesson or two, and then the problems with the Big Bang Theory as well. That'll come a little bit later, okay? So we won't get into those last two tonight. The first two we will get into. The full-grown creation doctrine has been called by some the doctrine of apparent age. I don't use that term because it kind of is a little misleading. It's only apparent if you reason from the idea that it was atheistic idea that it would just happen by chance. And it is what it's said to be in the scriptures. So I don't use that term. I just call it the full-grown creation. It's quite apparent that if Adam and Eve were created full-grown, and they were mature, then it's possible that other life forms could have been created full-grown or mature as well, since they were. So that wouldn't be out of line to reason that way, and we'll show arguments that they almost for sure had to be that way. Some of them had to be. In fact, it will be established that it was necessary for most of the life forms to be created full-grown, if not all of them. So they were created in that full-grown state like Adam and Eve were, not as babies. In order for predatory animals to survive, it would have been necessary for more than one pair of each life form to be created. In other words, if you have predators, they got to eat something. And if they're eating animals, and if you only have one pair of an animal, and they have to reproduce before the predator can begin to eat some of them, it would just wipe out some of the animals. So what we must have had is we had a number of various animals like deer and sheep and so forth. There weren't just one pair of them like there was with humans. There were many pairs set forth and created at that time. Had to be in order for this to work. And of course, the Bible doesn't tell us there was only one pair of each, one pair of cattle and one pair of sheep and so forth. Doesn't tell us that. So there's no reason to believe that there was only one pair. This would have several results. For example, it would have life forms such as coral reefs to exist full grown. Now, I've read where atheists have said, well, look, coral reefs they project backwards, and they say, well, corals, when they multiply, you take the one coral and it begins to multiply. When they multiply, then it takes so many years to grow a coral reef. Well, they're starting from zero, from just one coral or a pair of corals. Coral is an animal, and a pair of them, and so we got two of them, and then they multiply and make this reef. So then they project backwards. Of course, they're using uniformitarian geology to make this argument in the first place. And of course, they have discounted the possibility that the whole reef was created full grown. And so we don't have to argue, and we don't have to agree with their argument that it took so many million years for this reef to actually grow, or hundreds of thousands of years, or whatever they argue for the coral reefs to grow. No, they were created full grown. The reef was created full grown. The only two that had a pair of them, and only two was humans, Adam and Eve, and everybody else, all the other creations trees and plants and so forth. They had more than one pair or just one or two created. There were a multitude of them. This would explain the appearance of age for the stars as well. So this argument of the full-grown creation, it was ready to go. We'll show this from the text of the Bible that implies that in just a few minutes. It would explain how the Earth's surface could have been cooled off in a matter of seconds by God instead of the millions of years as atheists claim. They claim it was molten and had to cool off and took millions of years for this to occur. Of course, they're using uniformitarian geology again. They come back to it over and over. And they've given it up, but then they use it in their argumentation. The doctrine of a full-grown creation is implicitly taught, I believe, throughout the scriptures. So we'll lay this out as we develop it. For example, when Jesus turned the water into wine in John 2, verses 1 through 11, the wine, which was, I believe, probably unfermented grape juice, had all of the attributes of wine that had grown in a vineyard and had been pressed from grapes. So on the third day, there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. This also was bidden and his disciples to the marriage. And when the wine failed, now the problem we get into is we hear the word wine and we put it into English context. Well, the Greek word here for wine could be unfermented or fermented. It has to be argued from context. And I would argue that Jesus didn't get the whole crowd drunk. He didn't create a bunch of alcoholic wine to get them drunk. And so I would argue that it was almost certainly unfermented wine or grape juice. The word wine is used for both fermented and unfermented. And when the wine failed, the mother of Jesus said unto him, they have no wine. And Jesus said unto her, Mother, woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. His mother saith unto the servants, what service saith unto you? Do it. So she told him. Now there were 6 water pots of stone set up there after the Jews' manner of purifying, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. Now, if you study the firkins, we'll not go into it, but it was a pretty good amount of water here. Jesus said unto them, fill the water pots with water, and they filled them to the brim. And he said unto them, draw out now and bear unto the root of the feast, and they bare it. So the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and knew not whence it was, but the servants that had drawn the water knew. The ruler of the feast calleth the bridegroom, said unto him, every man setteth forth the good wine, first the good wine, when men have drunk freely. Then that which is worse, that has kept the good wine until now. So this that Jesus created, of course, was far better than anything that had grown. It was fate. This beginning with signs did Jesus in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed on him. Well, my point being here is the grape juice that he created was good shape. It was very high quality. And whenever miracles were performed, like miracles of healing and so forth, they were restored totally. If you go back to Naaman, his skin was he had leprosy back in the Old Testament, and his skin was restored like that of a little child. He didn't have any scars and other stuff on that skin, I would argue. No evidence of having had leprosy, skin like a little baby's skin. When Jesus multiplied the fishes, and the word fishes is a plural form of fish in the older English, the fish were complete as those that were caught by was as complete as those when caught by fishermen. Of course, they were in cooked form as well. When the day was now far spent, his disciples came unto him and said, the place is desert, and the day is now far past. Send them away that they may go into the country and villages round about and buy themselves somewhat to eat. So send them away. But he answered and said unto them, Give ye them to eat. And they said unto him, Shall we go and buy 200 shillings worth of bread and give them to eat? And he said unto them, How many loaves have ye? Go and see. When they knew, they said 5 and 2 fishes. So they checked it out, and they had five loaves and 2 fishes, 2 fish, we'd say. And he commanded them that all should sit down by companies upon the green grass. And they sat down in ranks by hundreds and by fifties. And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake the loaves and gave to the disciples to set before them, and the 2 fishes divided he among them all. They all ate, were filled, and they took up broken pieces, 12 basketfuls, and also the 12 fish of the fishes. And they that ate the loaves were 5,000 men. Now, what we have here is Jesus created fish, and they couldn't tell the difference. They were fish, full-grown fish in this creation, and nothing's too hard for God in this sense. And so they were full-grown fish. The bread was bread that had been cooked. The loaves were. Now, full-grown creation is implicit in this, in the miracle of the multiplying of the loaves and fish. If the stars, another argument we'd make for this, were for signs and for seasons, for days and years, as we see in Genesis 1:14-19, it'd be necessary that they create them with the light already reaching the earth for man's usage. They'd have to already be there. So we would argue then that the light was already there for man's usage. And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. Let them be for lights in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth, and it was so. So here the stars and the moon and the sun, all of these were given here for this purpose. Lights in the firmament divide the day and the night. And God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, that of course be the sun, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, there was morning, a 4th day. So here, all of these objects in the sky that give off light were giving light for the purpose of that light being used by man. And if they're created now and the light doesn't get here for a large amount of time, it couldn't serve its purpose. So now we get the question here is the light that we have from the stars, they're for signs and seasons, and so, or the moon and so forth. So that was the purpose. In order for this to happen, God could have done it by either placing the light in place between the star and the earth when he created it, or if the speed of light was much greater then than it is now, it could have reached the earth in a shorter time span. We have several possibilities. Now, what we run into is we're going to deal with these possibilities here in just a few minutes in this lesson. But we have the problem with it. The claim is made that it takes light billions of years to get from the stars, some of the distant stars, to the earth. And consequently, we're seeing stars that were a billion years in the past, or several billion years in the past, that were giving light. So we'll deal with that in some detail tonight and in this lesson, and then we'll follow up with another lesson or two, following up with some of their arguments, and we'll deal with them. Since many organisms cannot survive without their parents, for instance, most of your mammals have to have their mothers to suckle them. And your mammals would die if they were created in baby states as infants. And some of your mammals have to be taught by their parents how to function, how to eat, and how to forage for food and so forth. Since many organisms cannot survive without their parents, it would be necessary for these organisms to have been created full grown instead of in their infancy state. And they would be created full grown just like Adam and Eve were. So that would be reasonable. It would be necessary for trees to be producing fruit for Adam and Eve, or they would starve while the trees matured and produced fruit. So the trees were created full grown, already producing fruit. Same would happen if animals have to have the fruits from the trees and so forth. They would have to have them there. They would have to be there for them to use them. So we didn't have just 2 alligators. We had a whole bunch of them. We didn't have just 2 bears or 2 deer. We had a bunch of them. And they were full grown when they were created. And they had food with which to feed themselves. The birds were said to fly in the day that they were created, according to Genesis 1:20. And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open firmament of the heaven. So now the birds are flying, and the waters are swarming with living creatures. Not just 2 of them, they're swarming with it. So again, we don't have just 2 catfish created. There are probably millions and millions of them created all over the earth. I just picked on catfish because we're using to them here in Oklahoma. Birds do not fly in their infancy, but these birds are flying it appears on the day they're created. And they're flying in the firmament, expanse of the heavens and the sky. Whole forests would need to be in place to provide food for animals, nests for birds, not just forests, but grasslands and other things that provide food and shelter and habitat for animals. So all of these things would have to be all over the earth. They didn't just start and then spread. They were there, created in a full-grown state. Vast grasslands need to be in place to provide food for the herbivores. Now, some of your animals, of course, eat leaves off trees and other things, but the grasslands and so forth would have to be there as well. Seems to be what God said occurred in Genesis 1:11-13. Let's look at those passages, those verses. And God said, let the earth put forth grass, herb yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit after their kind, wherein is the seed thereof on the earth, and it was so. So the herbs were yielding seed already, and grass and fruit trees. All right. And the earth brought forth grass, herbs yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit, wherein is the seed thereof after their kind. And God saw that it was good. And it was evening, and it was morning, the 3rd day. Now, here we ask the question, all of this created, and it appears and the wording certainly fit being created in a full-grown state. And that's exactly what we're arguing for here. It was full-grown. In Genesis 18:14, is anything too hard for the Lord, for Jehovah? At that time I will return unto thee, and when the season cometh round, Sarah shall have a son. So now Abraham and Sarah are beyond the age of childbearing, Sarah particularly. And so God says she's going to have a child, she's going to have a son. And of course she does. So God can do what he says he'll do. And he could create in a full-grown state. That power. Now we're going to look at this when we think about it here a minute. We're going to look at the speed of light, and we'll look at the equation for the speed of electromagnetic waves, including light in any medium. Here is the velocity, and that's the speed or velocity. Velocity and speed are not the same thing, but let's just use them interchangeably for right now. We won't get into the differences. But one's a vector, one's a scalar. But velocity here is 1 over, it's a reciprocal, of the square root of epsilon mu. Epsilon is an electrostatic permittivity, and mu is an electromagnetic permeability. And so that determines the speed of light through the medium. Now, you're probably familiar with prism or lenses like on glasses, which refract the light. Now, light can be reflected, that's bouncing off basically, and it can be refracted or it can be reflected. But we're looking at refraction. Now, refraction is when the light goes through a medium and it changes speed. So the medium, the electrostatic permittivity, and electromagnetic permeability, these two factors determine the speed at which it travels. So when it goes through a prism, it goes at a different speed through the air than it does through the glass or the whatever the prism is made out of. Usually glass, could be plastic or some other material. So the speed of the light, then, the light is bent because it changes speed as it comes through it. And so it changes its speed, it's refracted then. We will get into the physics of it in great detail here. But the speed of light in a vacuum or in space, it's thought to be a constant. We're going to show that that's not exactly true. It's 1 over the square root of epsilon sub 0. This would be a vacuum, 0 would be a vacuum, mu sub 0. So this is the permittivity, electrostatic permittivity of a vacuum or space. This is an electromagnetic permeability, mu sub 0, of a vacuum or space. That's your formula for it. Now, we are told, and I was taught in the classes that I took, that C is a constant, the speed of light is a constant in a vacuum. Now that's for all electromagnetic waves, including light or radio waves and radar and so forth. But what we're going to show here is that that's not exactly true. We're going to prove it. We're going to prove that that's not exactly true. So we'll come into it. Epsilon is electrostatic permeability, mu is electromagnetic permeability, permittivity and permeability. Epsilon sub 0 is electrostatic permittivity of free space. And the number that's given here is this here, and this carries out quite a ways, farads per meter. Mu sub 0 is the electromagnetic permeability of free space, 4 pi times 10 to the minus 7th, and there's your units, all right, per amp squared. So the velocity of light in a vacuum is given as c, constant. It's said to be constant, which is not true, not exactly true. And it's this speed right here in meters per second, approximately 186,000 miles per hour. That's a rounded number, of course. Now, what we're going to look at here is see what the scriptures actually say about space itself. When we're looking at space, we have this situation. We have to ask ourselves, what does the Bible say about space? And we have the Hebrew word natah, which means to stretch out or spread out or extend or incline or bend. Brown Driver Briggs, Gesenius, Lexicon, page 639. This word could carry the idea of spreading out without the concept of stretching something, but here, I believe we can see something being stretched or spread out. In Psalm 104, verse 2, who covers thyself with light as with a garment, who stretcheth out the heavens like a curtain. So we see the heavens being stretched, and the term is used here for the heavens in Isaiah 42:5. Thus saith God Jehovah, he that created the heavens and stretcheth them forth. He that spread abroad the earth and that which cometh out of it. He that giveth breath unto the people upon it, and the spirit to them that walk therein. But notice he stretches them forth the heavens. The heavens are stretched. Now we'll look further. In Isaiah 45:12, I have made the earth and created man upon it. I, even my hands, have stretched out the heavens, and all their hosts have I commanded. Again, the heavens are stretched. Space is stretched, apparently. And he hath gotten here in Isaiah 51:13, and hath forgotten Jehovah thy God, thy maker, that stretcheth forth the heavens. laid the foundation of the earth, and fears continually all the day because of the fury of the oppressor, when he maketh ready to destroy, and where is the fury of the oppressor? Now notice here, he laid the foundation of the earth and stretched forth the heavens. So we have a stretching forth of the heavens here. Again, this term being used. Jeremiah 10:12 used it again. He hath made the earth by his power. He has established the world by his wisdom. This is talking about the creation. And by his understanding hath he stretched out the heavens. So the heavens were stretched out. Again, the same words being used. In Jeremiah 51:15, he hath made the earth by his power. He hath established the world by his wisdom. Again, creation. And by his understanding hath he stretched out the heavens. Again, the heavens are stretched out. Job 9:8, that alone stretcheth out the heavens and treadeth upon the waves of the sea. Again, heavens are stretched out. Job 26:7, he stretches out the north upon the empty space. So now we're looking out into space, being stretched out, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. And again, we have here the stretching out of the north in this case. Now in Isaiah 40:22, it is he that sitteth above the circle of the earth, and the heavens thereof are as grasshoppers, and stretcheth out the heavens as a curtain, and spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in. Again, we have the heavens being stretched out. Isaiah 44:24. You may say I'm using a little overkill here, but I just want to show you how much it's found in the Bible. Thus saith Jehovah thy Redeemer, and he that formed thee from the womb. I am Jehovah that maketh all things. Again, the creation that stretcheth forth the heavens alone, that spreadeth abroad the earth, who is with me. Now, in our last, I believe it's our last verse here, the burden of Zechariah 12:1, the burden of the word of Jehovah concerning Israel. Thus saith Jehovah, who stretches forth the heavens, and layeth the foundation of the earth, and formeth the spirit of man within him. Again, here, it's linked it along with creation. So the heavens were stretched forth in this creation. I come back to this word, natah, in Hebrew, stretch out, spread out, expand, incline, or bend. Now, it's certainly possible natah should be translated spread out rather than stretched out. That's possible, but let's look here. Space itself can be stretched. We can see this. In fact, here is a diagram that I copied off the internet of two massive objects. This would be two big stars, or maybe neutron stars, rotating around each other, and they cause ripples in space. We can see it because of how it affects the light that comes through it. And so this actually warps space itself. The space, due to this massive gravity and this movement of these rapidly moving objects, it actually creates a pattern that we can see in space. And so space is being stretched by the gravity of these stars, these black holes and stars and neutron stars. This is called a gravitational lens. That's what it's called. And here's a gravitational lens. And what they're seeing here is they're seeing the light being bent around these stars. Now here's a diagram of it. Again, I took this off the normal position of a star off the internet. Earth and the star, we see it. The apparent position of the star is here, but the sun, as it goes around the sun, this light goes around the sun, it gets refracted. That is, space gets bent so that the speed of light changes. So the speed of light changes in space. It's in space. It's not constant in space due to gravitational lenses. Now, my point being, if indeed we know this happens due to gravitational lenses, what if space were stretched and it did the same process? It would change the speed of light in space if space is stretched out, as it appears to be stated in the Bible. Here's some links that you can go to get information about gravitational lenses. And here's another site that you can go to, and you can, of course, pause this and get this. And this is in Science Magazine, 275, 5297, and 184 to 186 pages. Okay, that'll be your page numbers. And this is a postscript on Einstein's 1936 science article on this very subject. There are a number of articles that are out there. Of course, sometimes the math gets a little bit heavy for some people, gets into some calculus and so forth, but it's readable. Some of them are readable by the average layman. So what I'm saying here is we can see gravitational lenses occurring, and this occurs. So what I'm telling you is we know that the speed of light does change in space as space gets warped or misshaped due to something, in this case, gravity. But if space were stretched out, it might go faster in some parts of the universe than it does in other parts of the universe, if it's stretched. And this may explain some of the phenomena that we see, and we'll lay this out in our next lesson on this subject. Are there any questions?